the only one we know.
Yeah. Trying to represent objects in real life in our own little plastic electronic world, and so we can do things to help people accomplish goals, right? Why MVC? Does anybody know what MVC is? Has anybody heard that term before? Awesome. Does anybody know what a TLA is? Three-letter acronym. It's a really bad joke. MVC, yes, so model view controller. It's a way of separating code that may relate to there are three different parts to an application that relate to each other, but probably somewhat distantly, and it's a way of arranging your thoughts so that as code bases get bigger and bigger and bigger, things tend to get crazy, it gets hard to manage, and it's hard to work on with other people. So MVC is a methodology for sort of breaking things up. Let's see. So here is the obligatory diagram, right? Does anybody know what happens when you enter an address into a browser? You know, like www.google.com. What happens on computer sites? Does anybody know? We already heard from you, so let's get somebody know.
You send like a HTTP request to their site,
Yep.
which makes a lot of stuff happen, and then they send that back to you.
Very good. Exactly. That's right. So what happens? Yep, you make a request to a server. That server, exactly comes back with a response for you. So what we are worried about as engineers is how to arrange all that stuff and do really complicated things without showing the user all of the core details behind it. So yes, exactly. So if we look at the bottom here, browser comes to a web server. Does anybody, you guys are working with Rails right now, right? No? Okay, all right. Okay, so we won't worry about web server names or anything. There's things called WebBrick or Mongrel that will sort of receive these requests. And so then it needs to sort of break up what you've sent it and say, okay, well, what do we do with this, right? Like you could say, Facebook.com /profiles /3, and it's like, okay, well, what is this person looking for if they go to Facebook.com /profiles /3? They're looking for probably a user, right? They're looking for a user profile. So the system needs to be able to read the text you're putting in the address bar and make sense of it and understand what is the end user trying to accomplish and how can I best serve that person. So flagrantly plagiarized from Wikipedia. Model view controller is a software architecture pattern for implementing user interfaces. It provides a given software application to three interconnected parts, so it's to separate internal representations of information from the ways that information is committed. Blah 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 blah. Too long, right? MVC keeps your application and your teammates sane, happy, and productive. Okay? Some things that MVC does for you, it sounds like a lot of words, but really what you want is separation of concerns. I guess like the sort of baseline problem that I think a lot of people, or I guess like that sort of answered it for me was like obtrusive JavaScript. Does anybody know what obtrusive versus unobtrusive JavaScript is? No? Okay, so way back in the day, it used to be, there would be an HTML page, okay? And in that HTML page, you would have like a tag, in the old days we'd have like a font tag or something stupid. But nowadays you can have like a div tag, and then inside you could say style equals, color equals red, and that would make the font color inside of that tag red. But then you could say, onClick equals, and then you could put a bunch of JavaScript code there, and the JavaScript code could say, make the page blank, or like redirect me to some other thing, or make all this stuff happen. Now the problem with that was when you start dealing with like let's say all of you are working on an application, right? And all of you guys are maybe generating maybe like a page of code a day. After about a month, you're going to have 1,000 pages of code. Then maybe something goes wrong there or something. Okay, well maybe you're looking at the application through your browser and you're saying, it seems to be a JavaScript issue because when I press this button, something's supposed to turn blue, but it's not happening. So it's a JavaScript problem. Well, where do you go looking for that JavaScript problem? If the JavaScript is inside of your HTML file, You know, you might have JavaScript files, you might have CSS files, but if you have JavaScript living in your HTML file, suddenly you've got all these places you could be going looking for things, and you could waste your whole day doing that, which is terrible. And I've done that. Like I've been working in this industry for 15 years, and I've seen every wrong way. And believe me, it's really easy to do things the wrong way because everyone is pressed for time. But so separation of concerns is basically saying all the stuff that needs to do X is going to live here. All the stuff that needs to do Y is going to live here. And all the stuff that needs to go Z is going to live here. That way, when you have a huge application and you're working with, you know, all these other people, and someone, you know, some project manager comes to you and says, you know, this thing is wrong. You need to go and solve it. Then you know the right place to look at the first time. Okay, then the next thing is application efficiency. If you have everything living on one page, right? Let's say all of your, I think you guys have an assignment right now where everything is living on one page, right? And it's kind of a, you know, decent sized page. There's not too much going on there, but like imagine you're looking at an application that all of you've been working on for like 2 years. Where are you going to find this stuff? And then like let's say where's the computer going to find this stuff? You know, the computer's going to have to sift through all of this code, go looking through the file, scanning through all this stuff until it finds the right. So separating these things will allow the machine to know where to look for things. So it's also a sensible way of arranging code, and it's a common methodology. So when all of you are all working together on one thing, and you all are trying to collaborate, like maybe there's teams of 10 of you here, and 10 of you here, and 10 of you here, and you're all collaborating on different stuff that you all are thinking in the same way, and you're all sort of speaking in the same language. So here's some problems that engineers face. You know, maybe someone gives you an assignment, and you all go off and do it. I guarantee you, there will be clumps of you who will maybe do things somewhat alike, and there will be clumps of you who do things slightly different. There'll be, you know, people who do things that none of us thought the approach was possible. But everyone will come up with something different. That's problematic if suddenly you write code and then you leave the company and he has to fix it, right? Then suddenly it's just like, why? Why did this get done this way? I would do it this way. And suddenly all your stuff gets ripped out and thrown away, and then he puts all of his code in there. So MVC sort of, it's sort of a way of thinking about things in a similar way, and it's actually a way of thinking that a lot, you know, experts have come up with, that have decided that there's, you know, it's a more efficient way than all of these disparate approaches. Bugs happen. Going back to what I said before, how do you find the problem? Where do you start looking? Where does the machine look for these for your code? And everything grows in size over time, right? Like the more you work on things, the more complicated things get, the more rules get injected, the more corner cases you have to address. The code gets bigger, the code base gets bigger, and then with that, then you need to hire more people to deal with these things. And so MVC is just is a common thought process that helps everybody kind of come in and understand things in the same way. So MVC fixes these things in a number of ways. Sort of an agreement on a common and proven structure, and then separation of concerns. You know where to look. I guess I'm sort of repeating myself now, but by organizing your code sensibly, many people can collaborate together. And then if two people are working on the same thing, then their code, you're minimizing the opportunity where collisions can occur. Because like if two people are working on the same file and they both edit it and then they both check it in, chances are things might collide. So we want to minimize and mitigate that situation. So let's break things out. So what are models and what are views and what are controllers? First thing is, let's start with a model. So models are representations of objects. It's basically a file. Like a model will be a file which basically says, okay, like let's use the God object user, right? Every website has a user, right? And so when you log in, when you create an account on some website, when you register, even if it's just your email address and your name and your password, maybe even not even your name, you become a user object in that system. And so your information gets stored in a database somewhere, and from there, all the other code is going to revolve around that user. You know, what is that user going to be allowed to do? What is that user? What's going to happen to users? How are we going to group users? Maybe we are a financial services firm, and there's a bank out there who wants to scan the users in here, or maybe we are a bank and we have users and we want to export our information to some partner bank, for promotions or whatever. We need to be able to represent users in a thoughtful way. So basically, models tend to be represented in the database. It doesn't necessarily have to be the case. An object can exist in memory that doesn't necessarily need to be stored, but just for your session. But we'll worry about that some other time. Models do the heavy lifting. If a user, let's say, has a bank account, right? Then there'll be a user object, which will require a user model, right? And then there'll be an account object, which will require an account model. And then that account, there'll be things like, accept payments or make payments, or there's going to be all these behaviors that revolve around an account. And so we don't want that code living somewhere else because it pertains to an account, right? And so the model is a great place for all that code to live. All the heavy lifting that belongs under sort of an umbrella of an object will live in its model. And in Rails, models should be fat. When I say that, there's this sort of paradigm of fat controller, or fat model, thin controller. And the reason being is this is where all the meat of your code is going to live. It's within the models. So next we have views, right? MV views. So a view, we've all probably worked with HTML files. Something static, something easy. It shows right up on your browser. It presents you with information, and it gives you options that you can interact with. So a view presents data to the user via the UI. It should not contain business logic. You should not be doing account processing in a view, right? Because, again, right, something, like you're trying to pay your account, the payment goes to the wrong place. Where are you going to look? The last place you're going to look is the page that handled it. The place you're going to look is in the model, because that's where that logic should live. So if there's logic living in the view, you're making all of your coworkers very unhappy by doing that. And plus, views, servers generate views, right? When you enter that address in the address bar, and the page comes back, that page all that code has to travel down the pipe, over whatever network, maybe, your wireless network and your data plan, to get to your phone or to get to your laptop and present you these things. So you want that view to be as light as possible. You don't want any business logic or anything noisy in there. And it can come in many forms. It doesn't have to be a web page. It could be a CSS document. It could be XML or JSON. It could be a machine requesting things, right? One machine could be talking to another saying, "Give me all the accounts that are past due, so that I can send them. I'm the bill collector. Connect with the bank, get all of those. That's so you don't have to pay human beings to do these things. But it doesn't have to be a visual thing. It can just be a presentation of data. Lastly, we have controllers. Controllers are the piece that lives in between these things. So basically, a controller says, controller, is really sort of a step away from the browser. When the request comes in, that request, okay, let's go back to facebook.com/profile/3. What that will do, that actually gets sent to a router, and the router says, all right, well, everything where it says /profiles is going to go to the profiles controller, right? And then basically what it's going to say is, okay, well, because it's requesting a specific one with the ID of 3, then we're going to say, okay, well, that's a show action. And basically what we're going to do is we're going to show the profile for user number 3. And so the controller is what the router is talking to when it receives that address. And so, if it says, okay, well, I've received, a request for profile number 3, well, now we're talking about a user. We've narrowed it down to a user profile, which is an object, right? So now, what we need to do is we need to show on the view the object that's being requested. So we reach to the model, we get the model, we get the record of the database, which is ID number 3, and it comes back to the controller, which then renders the view using the data from the model, and then presents it. So then that HTML page will come up, and it will be populated. There will be all these little variables in there saying username, user account number, the account balance, all these things, and those will be populated with data pulled from the model, but displayed in the view. Does everything make sense so far, or am I going too fast? How are we all doing? Yeah? So? Yeah, tell me, you say you're a little iffy. Maybe I can expound on things more. Is there?
No, it's okay. It's just like, maybe like if you slow down, like you seem to go really fast.
I
Talk
felt a
really fast.
little nervous, but
It's okay.
Okay, cool. Okay, yeah, so, let's see. I was sort of
I got
thinking-
one question real quick.
Sure.
Hey, so you said fat like FAT, does that actually stand for something, or are you just saying?
No,
like,
it just means it should be big, like, over time, like I said, as you work on your application, if you look literally at the file of your controller, and your controller is, you're scrolling and scrolling and scrolling and scrolling, what that means is you're putting a lot of your business logic into a code. Here, maybe I can show an example of a controller. I'm gonna have to send an NDA out for all of you to sign. So I like money, and so even though I have a day job, I do contracting on the side for fun, just to sort of stay sharp. And so here, let's take a look at someone's application that I'm working on. So here's a Rails app. Can everybody see? Is it too small? I can boost this up if you like. A little bit, sure.
Thank you.
Okay, so if you look on the left-hand side here, we have sort of, here's the name of my application, here's a folder, app, right? And so then here's a little directory called controllers. So let's look in here. We have a bunch of controllers. So this is an application, basically what it is. Think of a Facebook timeline for families, right? But it's private. Some people don't want to expose, photos of their young children to to people out on Facebook, because there's a lot of people on Facebook, and there's a lot of weird things that can happen on Facebook that you can't control. So the application here is basically, let's make a private sort of timeline. So there's like a family controller, there's an admin controller, which basically would be like, for someone like me who wanted to go in and tinker with the app, but like maybe I wanted to add like a test user, or maybe I wanted to add some test data so I could experiment with things. So there's various controllers here. So let's look at families controller, all right? So if you look at this file, it's very small, it's very barren, right? There's very few things. All it's doing is it's saying, okay, show family, right? Basically it's just saying, so basically what you're gonna be doing in the controller is you're gonna reach for models, and then you're just going to render them. If you don't see, you'll see out here this explicit render edit. That's basically calling up explicitly, I want to render the edit view. Now, if you don't say, render something, it's going to assume that there is a view that follows the name. Rails is nice like this. It basically, it does all this guessing for you. It basically says, okay, well, if you're calling an update route, we're going to show the update view. And all of the code that's going to be rendered on the update view is going to be dictated by the controller, but then it's going to be, all the hard stuff is going to happen on the model. So let's look at the family model. I don't know if there's one, but I will bet all of you money that there is one. And what do you know, there's a family model. All right, so not a very big model, okay? There's not a lot of stuff happening here, which is okay. But if there is a lot of stuff, like maybe I'm going to just look and see if there's like a user.
I have a question, really quickly.
Sure.
When you have active record, double column base,
Yeah.
what is this double column base?
It's sort of like a namespace. That's you're sort of referring to a class.
Oh, so it's kind of a class.
Yes, exactly. It's
Okay.
referring to a class. Active record base is sort of that holds all of the pieces that every Rails model will have.
Yeah.
And it's basically saying plug all Rails magic into user.
Okay.
So that when if I say capital U user dot find, and then I say 1, then there's all these methods that come from this base class,
Yeah.
where it will go looking in the database for the user with the ID of 1. And that's just, they call that they call it Rails magic. That's all that comes from active record. So active record basically, if I could make a very hand wavy statement, active record does a lot for you just out of the box. But basically, if I didn't have active record base, I could have a class user, okay, and I could generate a class user. But I would have to write all this code. I have to do all these arduous things in order to make it, into an object, or make it, or to sift through the database. You know what I mean? Like if I didn't have active record there, I would have to go out and write a bunch of code. The beauty about Rails is designed to say, all right, 95% of the web applications out there in the world are all going to be doing a lot of the same things, right? We're all going to have users. We're all going to have, some sort of business model that's going to do something, right? Like it's going to, I don't know, through photos or through all these objects. But basically what we need to do is we just basically need to come up with the specifics. All of us, when we were going to work on web applications, we're going to come up with specifics. Rails is going to say, whatever your specifics are, that's cool. We're going to give you all the tools you need to sort of sift through them and present them so that you have to write as little code as possible. So writing as little code as possible isn't always the goal, but it's always it's very nice to have that, because we don't have to tinker with all the machinations of how a record gets pulled out of the database. Rails does that for us. So if something is wrong with the way something is coming out of the database, Rails will show you that you probably did it wrong. And you will know, because you can look through purely your code, right? This is all your code that you wrote. All of the stuff that does all the crazy processing in the background, you probably didn't mess up. I mean, you can, if you want, you can go and you can mess up everything that Rails does. You can overwrite functions that it gives you, but just don't do that. You'll be fine. Yes, sir.
Does your controller usually or always sit between the view and the model?
Yes. I hesitate to say with 100% confidence always, but I think in most cases, yeah. There are times where you may work with objects that don't necessarily require interaction with a controller. Like, let's say I'm trying to think of something that I work with in my current job. So I work for an email marketing firm. We have an outsourced company that handles all of our billing stuff, because there's a lot of legal compliance that comes with taking credit card, handling chargebacks, things of that nature. So we just basically offload that to other people. But we have people who have billing accounts. And rather than store all that billing information locally, what I say is, all right, reach out to the API and grab me a billing account with this ID. And then I create sort of a billing account object locally that I can then tinker with. And that could all happen within the model. There may be zero interactions with the controller in that situation, because one model may be toying with another. It doesn't necessarily, and I'd say that's probably the one situation where that doesn't happen, is where something is happening in the background, where you don't, because the controller is handling calls. It's basically handling requests. And that request could come from a machine or it could come from a human. But basically, the controller is going to handle requests. So anytime a request is put into a browser, or if a machine that's listening, maybe it's listening for, I don't know, I guess the example I'm thinking was like a fax, you know what I mean? Like a fax machine is just sitting there listening for someone to call, to send it information, right? It's like a phone line. You could call a fax phone line, but it won't answer you with a human. It will answer you with a machine, a big screech in the ear. Computers on the internet are doing the same thing. And I go back to banks because I say that is probably the first system that really was doing that, right? XML was designed. XML is basically HTML that's for machines to talk to people. But yeah, they can do so with JSON. Forgive me, I'm a little long-winded here, but not always, but for when requests come in. Any other questions? All right, I'll continue. So yeah, back to you. Very long-winded answer. The idea is all of your logic that's going to revolve around a model should live in the model file, and the controller should basically just say, okay, you want the address of such and so, third cousin, sister. Go to the model, get that information presented in the view. So the controller is just going to reach in. It's just going to reach into models and throw things onto views. So that's ultimately the goal. All right, so let's get back to the lecture. business logic, controller receives the results from the model, and then presents the result back via a view. So that may be my last slide, but I could show some examples via like in a Rails application if you want how to generate these things. Okay. Cool. So let's see if I can. Okay. So all right, let's go back to that that application that I had running. Okay, so this is a terminal. You guys are probably going to spend a lot of time on these things. All right, so I just want to make sure my application is running, and then I can say, all right, sorry, localhost 7,000. Okay, so you see there's a whole bunch of stuff going on. All right, so here we have an application. First thing you see, a button. Sign up to get started. Let's see where this points to. Okay, so let's look down here. Localhost 7,000, sign up. All right. So that's going to say, that is pointing to a route. Okay? So someone has written this code and basically they're pointing to a route. So let's go look in the code and see our routes file. So the routes file, I'm sorry, I haven't touched on enough. The routes file is extremely important because this is sort of the first line of defense when a request comes in. It's under config routes, if I remember correctly. And so there we go, routes.rb. All right, so basically a route file, you start at the top, and a request comes in, and basically the first thing that happens is this route file gets checked, and it's like, all right, localhost 7,000, which is basically my root development domain. It's just an address on my machine, /sign up. Where is sign up? Well, the computer's going to start at the top, and it's like, does it say welcome? No. Is it this? So root 2, you see that right up. Sorry. This is basically like, if you enter nothing other than basically your entrance domain, it will take you to a controller stories pound index, which is the action. So let's go there first. All right. This is going to show us our home page. So sorry, I just kind of did a right turn on you guys, but we'll look at the root first. Okay. So the controller we're talking about is stories, and that one is right here. And the action after the pound sign is, I have a terrible memory, like goldfish. Thank you. Okay, did you say index?
Yep. Yeah, line
okay.
5.
Okay, beautiful. So yeah, so that is going to take us to, this is our controller, all right? Now if you notice, there are all these other controllers, index, show, create, edit, update, destroy. These are all parts of, these are called the CRUD methods, a horrible name, but remember that. CRUD is like create, read, update, destroy. These are 4 things that everybody does with models in general, or objects in general when you're working on a web app. You're going to create objects, you're going to read objects, you're going to update them, you're going to destroy them. Maybe not for all of them, but they are there by default. So if you create a controller through the Rails terminal, those are what you get out of the box. So index is just kind of like the home page. So yeah, so this basically, it has some code essentially that's pertaining to stories, right? And so there's like viewable stories for user, and then there's a user ID. I don't want to delve too much deep into it. The point is, this controller has a view. Okay, so here this controller is grabbing an array of objects, stories, plural. There's going to be multiple ones. It could be one, but we're talking about multiple stories which are objects. So I guess there's a viewable stories model somewhere, which is, I lied, there doesn't seem to be one. But let's look at stories index.html.erb, or maybe HAML. So under views, we will see stories, and then, what do you know? There's an index. Oh, .slim. Okay, I don't even know what that is. But so this is a representation of HTML. This is, I apologize, this is some sort of an abstraction. But basically, dot filter container is like a class name. And so basically what this is doing, it takes the stories that we received from the controller, and it says, all right, for each story, render a story. And that means there's probably a partials named story, which basically has code that belongs to each individual story object. And it's just presentational stuff, right? What's the font color? How does it come? Maybe it comes with a picture. Maybe it has some text that goes along. But basically, we're compartmentalizing, right? I mean, if you look at this, it does look a little bit nutty. It's a little bit complicated. But the beauty of this file, it's 19 lines long. If we were to look at this in the browser, let's see what the browser is showing you. Let's look at this source file, right? Okay. Now there's a lot going on here, okay? Right? And all of these are all references to JavaScripts, right? All of this is code. Imagine if this was all, I mean, this is a link to another file. It's a link to another file, link to another file. And a lot of these could be miles long. Now that's fine and dandy if you're a computer. But if you're a human being trying to work on these things, that can be nightmarish very quick. So ultimately, we care less about what's getting sent to the computer. That's all going to be presented to the user. And as long as the UI is nice, who cares what this page looks like? I mean, there are people who care, but it's less important. What's important is when you go to work every day, you don't want to have to sift through all this stuff, right? You want to know exactly where to look. And in the file where your problem lives, you want it to be 20 lines long. You want to be like, oh, of course, it's right there, right? It makes it obvious for you. So everything that's happening is an abstraction. Everything that's going on with Rails is a culmination of years and years of work to make your lives easier. We're trying, people before you and before me are trying to make this more human understandable. The more human understandable it is, the easier it is to fix. If it's easy to fix, your boss has to pay you less money. The goal is to make it sensible and to make you happy and to make you enjoy working on this stuff. Because a lot of people have worked on this technology for years and it's been horrible. And each year a new abstraction layer comes out and it's a little bit easier. You write this line of code and then 10 things happen, right? And that's sort of the Rails idea. If you know the right action, if you know the right way to phrase things, it will do a lot of stuff for you. All you need to do is understand how these things relate on a general level, and then you can guide yourself through the code base and make sense of things and accomplish tasks in a meaningful and efficient way. So that is the ultimate goal of MVC, to make it easy, to make your life easier. It sounds complicated, but it's a culmination of the work of a lot of people to try and help you guys. I still have 7 minutes. Do we have any questions? Let's do questions.
Yeah, I see it says AngularJS and
Yep.
Rails.
Okay.
I don't know. I don't know a ton about Angular, but I was just curious. Well, yeah, not that much. Thank you. But I guess so. Do people use Ruby on Rails, or you're just using Rails with Angular there?
So Angular, basically, think of different code bases, right? Like a team of people over here wrote Rails, during a time, and a group of people over here wrote Angular during a time. Now, as things progress, people move to different backends supplant, the previous ones. Thankfully, a lot of people don't work in .NET anymore. Thankfully, Java is something that a lot of people don't have to do anymore. But essentially what I'd say a lot of these are, I'd say there's a specific version of Angular or maybe a library that interfaces with Rails in a customized way. And so it's kind of going back to what I said before, where there are conventions. With Ruby on Rails, the sort of buzz phrase you'll hear a lot is convention over configuration. It used to be there would be these, like with Java, there would be there's this horrible place called the config directory. And basically what it is all these files where you have to say, okay, well, when I'm talking about my database, I'm talking about, this port and this server name and this, thing, and you had to hand wire all these things. And people with, like really bad body odor and, just really thick glasses would just be wiring these things up, you know what I mean, and not talking to anybody, all that scariness has been sort of abstracted away, and this is sort of one of an expression of that. There are libraries where it say, okay, well, if you're going to use Angular and you're going to use Rails, here are some nice ways that these things can all port together. And so basically, again, there'll be these conventions, and then you can read, minimal documentation and be up and running, and then Angular will be able to. Because the ultimate goal of Angular is to represent your objects. It's going to pull your models. Angular is going to talk to your controller the same way that your user is going to talk to your controller. But basically, what Angular is going to say, if someone clicked on a button and they're like, okay, I want to see who's behind this profile on Friendster or whatever, and Angular is going to say, okay, well, they selected, this user with this ID, and Angular is going to look for that model. It's going to grab that data, and then it's going to pull it up through the controller, and then re-render it, but with all this behavior around it, right? JavaScript is going to provide you behaviors that just regular HTML files aren't going to. So that's sort of the ultimate thing. Nowadays, MVC is starting to move more into the front end as we do more work on our phones and our iPads, and you cannot control who is going to touch your application from. It used to be people would say, okay, I'm going to make like a mobile app, or I'm going to make a mobile section of my website. I'm going to make a Google TV section. I'm going to make an iPad section. I'm going to have all this custom CSS and JavaScript for all these people depending on how they touch my application. I could go with my laptop to the mobile site, right, and get this really horrible experience. Or I could go with my mobile phone to the website and get a really horrible experience. You can't control who's going to touch what with what instrument. And so basically you have to sort of, so now what they're doing is they're saying, okay, well the best possible thing is, now we're going to do MVC on the front end. And so that way, all the back end is going to do is it's going to store data, persist things, but now we're going to have all this code on the front end, which you can then, once you load the website the very first time, your phone caches that JavaScript file. It lives there forever until you clear it out of your cache, and then you can do all this processing right here. I mean, there's just vast amounts of data that live on your phone that you don't even know about. Web apps just waiting for you to touch them. And then if they need to, if you need to get data, like if you want to pay your bill, then it will call down to the server and it'll be like, okay, here's my bank account, here's my money, blah, 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 and then you get back, done, right? And that takes a really long time, and that sucks. But most things are just kind of happening really fast because there's a whole MVC operation happening on your phone. So, so that's sort of like the next sort of direction. But you guys are all going to be experts at that soon, and in a very short time. Any more questions? I still have 2 minutes. Here. Let's see. Basically, all of this is for you guys. Like, it seems like this horrible thing to learn. This is as easy as it gets right now. It's going to get easier. As time goes on, it's going to get easier. But the thing is, this is all still really hard, bottom line. But it's all, the idea is to break things up into smaller pieces that are digestible, that are sensible. And some people, you go to a tech company, some people live only in the view, right? They're only styling it. They're only making it look pretty. They're only structuring the appearance. Some people only live, in the back end, and they're only dealing with controllers and models and things, and behaviors and databases. There's, a lot of these applications are just vast worlds of code where you can find something that you really dig and get really good at it. But it's better to have a broad perspective. Yes, sir.
How many people would you say worked on the Kinscape?
I'm actually just started to work on it this week, and I think there are 2 engineers who have created it. So much of the code that exists here is generated by 2 people. And that's the difference too, right? It used to be, when I first was an engineer, I worked for a credit card company that no longer exists. They were subprime lenders, and they deserve to go down. But they had armies of people, right? There was 12 or 24 engineers, and we were all doing, what now 2 people can do. And we were paying Sun Microsystems, I think, $200,000 a month to run this thing. It was called Net Dynamics, and it was sort of a precursor to JSP, which is Java Server Pages. And all JSP does is it puts Java in an HTML page. But back in the day, I mean, this cost this company billions of dollars, so much money. And like, I mean, I helped them switch off of that system onto JSP, which was open source. And suddenly they were saving $200,000 a month, right? Great, you know, like, but here we are in 2015, right? Jesus, it's scary to say. And like, now 2 people can do things that banks couldn't do 15 years ago, you know, like, with you and a friend, you guys can make web apps that can do amazing things. All you need to do is point them in the right direction. You know, there's so many tools available to you. So now you just have to learn the sort of the layer that does all the magic behind it. Yes, sir.
So where's the dialogue going now? Is this model still at the forefront? Are they talking about new models or new approaches? And where's the?
You mean as far as MVC is concerned?
Yeah. What's the?
Well, there are a lot of different ways that you guys are all going to probably tinker with Ruby on Rails. What I would suggest you do, in fact, I would insist that you guys do, go tinker with Python and look at Django. So Django is a framework, and it's called MTV. It's like Model Template View. Now it's a similar thought process in that it breaks things down, but the structure of it is completely upside down to me. It feels alien. I mean, I almost like when I think Django, I think the color green because it just felt so alien to me. But the way it works, it's basically an inheritance-based model where when you create things, basically, when you focus in on a subject, you sort of start from the top and then you create smaller and smaller pieces that inherit from the piece above it. And it's a completely upside down sort of way of thinking about it. But the nice thing is, it's different, right? And I encourage all of you, get your hands dirty in every language. Even if you just touch it for a day, the more you try different things, you'll see why. You know, some people created one thing differently. You know, it's almost like a metaphor for humanity. There isn't one right way to do any of this. You know, someone thought Rails and they said, well, I need this, and here's how I'm going to go. And a lot of people agreed, but Django is completely different, and it feels very different. It takes a long time to get used to, but it made me better. And one thing that I love about Django, it comes with an admin console right off the bat. So it's like you basically install it, and you can immediately, start tinkering with, all the different pieces that come just sort of out of the box. Whereas with Rails, you'd have to create your own admin console. And if you're a one-person shop, like one of these guys, right? That might be really great for you. You may need to be managing user accounts. You may, maybe you're a nonprofit. Maybe you have, all the high mucky mucks who make lots of money but don't really do a lot of things. And then you have, all of the sort of the frontline workers who are out there who have all these behaviors that they need to accomplish, but maybe they're all different, and they all have accounts that you as the IT person need to manage. Back to what I was saying before, try everything. Seriously, don't think that one language is always going to last, because I guarantee you that things get occluded very quickly in this world. So it's way better to be agile and to be open-minded than to just say, I'm going to become an expert at this one language and I'm going to ride that off into the sunset, because that is a bad strategy. Think of all the COBOL people were really psyched when they heard about the Y2K bug, because they were all probably working at Denny's before then, and suddenly, oh, $150 an hour, sweet, and then they're all unemployed again. So, but that is the nature of this business. It's better to be open-minded and to be experimental and to try out new things. So don't think that Rails and JavaScript JavaScript you're going to be stuck. There's no competitor there. But Angular versus Ember, all these things, experiment with all of them, because you may find something that you like, and there may be other people who agree with you, and you may become an expert. I'll give you guys just one last anecdote. Yeah, so I went off to college in 1996, and I didn't know what I wanted to do, and I went to all these classes. I had a friend in high school who he was my bass player in my band, right? And we would play punk rock and all this stuff, and and I went to college, and he went off and became a drug dealer, and he went to jail, and he then got out of jail, and he found a job at a newspaper company, and he then created in 2004 for the largest Rails app that was ever created. And in doing so, he started running into these situations where, he was having performance problems and he was having all kinds of other issues. So he started coming up with all these little tools like Redis and all these other things, the names you might be familiar with. And he created a company called Engine Yard, and he became this sort of like, he became the person that people went to on IRC chats. And his name was Ezra Zygmunt-Tubbs. He actually just died last December, but he was a friend of mine. And he was this inspiring person because here I was trying to make it in the tech world. And suddenly my old friend, the drug dealer, shows up. And I'm like, what are you doing here? And he's like, well, I've got my own tech company and I've got all these people working for me. And like he would walk down the street and everybody recognized him. And I don't want to badmouth the guy. I shouldn't call him a drug dealer, but that's really what he was. And that's how I learned. And but he was the nicest guy. And he made my first fake ID. But he was always tinkering. He was always tinkering, right? Didn't matter what he was doing. He was always tinkering. He was always looking for a new solution. And he found it in Rails. And he became, go look up Ezra. I'd spell his name for you. You would not remember it. But he is a very inspirational guy to me. And he's the perfect story. He did not go to college. He just went out there and did it. And he looked for help on IRC. He wasn't afraid to ask questions. He wasn't afraid to try and do something ambitious. And he was rewarded handsomely for it. For as long as he was around, he was a really wonderful person. And I still look up to him. And I think all you guys have the chance to do that same thing. Just don't rest on your laurels. Like think of this career as college that's going to suck up your every waking moment. You're going to be always studying. You're going to be always tinkering. You're going to be always experimenting. You're always going to be collaborating. But you're always going to be not knowing what you're doing. And that's a great place to be because you're going to be getting better at something. So just keep that perspective in mind. Yes, sir.
I just want to ask real quick. When you learn a new language, what's your approach? Do you just go at it and start?
I guess I kind of am the old school way. Like I would just go buy a book. My wife hates that because I have a house full of books. I live in a condo and I have 2 kids, and like my whole garage is books. Because you can't do anything with books now. Like I have a garage sale, so I'll sell my books. People look at me like, I got some of those too. You want them? Because they all live on an iPad too. Like you can get all these things on an iPad, but go find. I used to love cookbooks, right? Because they would just kind of walk you through. There used to be this thing called Agile Development. The book is still around, but like Agile Web Development with Rails, like 2nd edition or 4th edition or something like that. A lot of Rails people call that the Bible. And the reason why is because the guy who wrote it basically sort of wrote it as someone like one of these guys. You're a regular schmo, you're sort of an independent contractor, and you find yourself a client on the internet who wants to start a web business, right? And what they do is he walks you through like, oh, well, what, the guy wants, a way to create an application. So I just say, Rails, G, scaffold, depot. And then suddenly I have all these things, and I can enter. Let's do that real quick. Okay. Sorry, I hope I'm not going overtime. But all right, let's just create a new application. Come on. All right. So let's say Rails, new, fun, new lesson. Dorky name. What did I do? Finish nice. Oh. All right. Should be doing that inside someone else's application. All right. So now we're just going to create. Okay. So I said, 3 words, right? It generated all these files for me, gave me all this garbage, and now it's installing all those things. Again, abstraction, right? It's just like I could go in and I could make all these files individually if I wanted to, and the computer won't care. Because if they're all there, yay. But the fact that I could just do that and step up and talk to you guys while it's doing all the installing in the background is even cooler. So all right, now let's say, all right, cd on new lesson, and then Rails generate scaffold blah, right? Anything. So a scaffold basically says, give me everything. Give me the model, give me the view, give me the controller. And basically, now it generated all this fun stuff, okay? It created a migration, right, to create blobs, right? It's gonna, when I run that migration, it will just, it will create a table in a database. So then it creates blah.rb, which is the model file. It loads testing and starts creating all these software tests for me. And it even writes some preliminary tests. You know, it kind of gets you off on foot. So it's like, it's just created, what, like 15 files. It even gave me like style sheets and JavaScript and CoffeeScript, stuff that I'll probably not even, I'm guaranteed I'll never touch it. But it's there for me if I need it. And so now, let's just say rake db migrate. We'll run the migration, and then we'll go over here. I'm praying that this, oh, I need to start my server, sorry. Rails S. All right, kickstart our server. Smoke and much motor noises, and we go to localhost 3000, and what do you know, there's an application sitting there waiting for us. All right, so let's say blobs. What do you know, there was a page there waiting for me. And so here, so if I'm saying blobs, that's, my model was blah, which is a terrible name, but it doesn't really matter what it is right now. I created a model, and now this view is saying here, it's showing through the controller, it's showing me all of my blobs. So let's create a new one. I didn't really give it any properties. I could have done so. So let's do something else. Sorry to back up here. So we'll say Rails G, which is short for generate, and then we'll say
DBC.
sorry? DBC, perfect. And then we'll say name string social security number blew it. Oh, finger. Okay. Rick, am I like going way over here? Should I be stopping?
You should be meeting with Sharif in a little.
Okay, I was sort of taking advantage of extra time, but stop me if I should be stopped.
Yeah, so it's almost 3. It's about 2:58.
All right. Well, okay. So we'll.
If you want to wrap up, that'd be great.
Okay. Yeah. Anyway, sorry. I wanted to just sort of show you. Rails will generate. Will give you. If you do a scaffold, it'll generate all these files for you to let you. It'll let you create objects immediately. You know, just by presenting pages out of the box with a few quick commands. But then, anyway, there are books that can walk you through things. And that book I highly recommend, Agile Web Development with Rails, because what it does, it sort of phrases things as an experience. It's like the book reads like a client experience. It's like each chapter is like, day 1 we accomplished this, but the client said, oh, but you didn't give me this. And then it says, oh, Rails has another nice command for that. And it will basically step you through why a lot of these tools exist. And you'll realize that you're getting a lot out of the box that is the result of a lot of people saying, hey, people need these things all the time. We're going to give you tools that are going to generate them. So you're not wasting your time doing all this sort of like groundwork. You can focus on getting your business together and focus on the things that really matter. Anyway, thanks. My name is Kees.